Thank you all very much for joining us today. So today's lecture is one of a series of lectures that are part of the Oxford Center of Hindu Studies, Hinduism in Modern Contemporary Society Research Project. So this project looks at sociological issues that concern Hindus and Hinduisms as either navigate the contemporary world. The main goal of this project is to create a platform for a community of scholars working on these issues. We have had a conference already. We're now running this lecture series, and we have plans for readings and paper incubators. You registered for this lecture with your emails. If you don't want to be on our mailing list for future events and correspondences, please do let us know by sending an email to hmss@ochs.org.uk. Don't worry if you didn't get that, just go to the OCHS website, search for research projects, and go to the one that says contemporary research projects, and then you'll find our one, Hinduism and Modern Contemporary Society. You'll find the email there, and then you can tell us if you want or not want to receive these. So every 3 or so months, we'll have a guest lecturer that will talk about a specific issue to do with the intersections of Hinduism and contemporary society. Although anyone is invited to attend these lectures, they're meant for scholars working in the field. So any questions or discussion after the lecture needs to be academic and not general. For this reason, we'll only take questions written out in a chat. So if you're going to want to ask a question, you'll need to send your question personally to Angela Burt. You'll see her in a list of participants. She should be the recipient. So don't send the question to the general chat because they will not be addressed there. You can text these questions to Angela at any time during the lecture, and at the end we'll have 20 minutes or so to pass them on to our lecturer, which leads me on to our lecturer, actually interviewee, as we will have an interview format today. So Prema Goet is a multidisciplinary researcher whose main interest lies in the intellectual history, culture, and languages of South Asia. He has degrees in Sanskrit and philosophy of religion from SOAS, University of London. He is currently a visual-anthropologist, researcher for the Śākta Traditions Research Project at the Oxford Center of Hindu Studies. He has many other he's participating in many other different projects as well. His interests focus mainly on the performative ritual practices of various ascetic groups of South Asia. He has extensively worked with various practitioners from the region, documenting and producing a vast array of ethnographic works on tantric rituals, worship of the goddess and goddesses, aghora, and yogic practices, among others. Today, I'll be talking with Prema about his experiences and ethnographic research with the Shakta Aghoris, who are kind of on the periphery of Hinduism. Specifically, one group of aghoras who attend the yearly Ambubachi Mela festival at the Kamakhya Temple in Assam. So Prema has long-term friendships with these aghoras and has first-hand experiences of them mixing extreme antinomian ascetics of priestly services and philanthropy. I should note that Prema has published a photojournal entitled Against the Grain, which he will use to illustrate his presentation. You'll see photographs pop up during this presentation. It's best to put it on full screen if you want to get the full experience of this, but please be aware that some of these images are quite distressing because they're quite graphic in terms of the types of sacrifices that are being done. So be aware of that. So if you want a hard copy of Prema's book, you can get one or more directly from him. We'll send you links to help you connect with him after this lecture. So anyway, Prema, welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
It's good to see you. I'm glad we could get you onto this as well, because your research has interested me for a long time. So what we'd like to do what I'll do first is I'll ask you. I wanted to ask you in general a quick question about for those who are unfamiliar with the Aghoris. Can you give us kind of, I know this is difficult, but can you give us an elevator? The elevator question and answer version of who they are in general.
The short version. Because there's always two or more answers to everything, and of course one can have the difficult answer and then a short answer. And I don't know if I can put everything in very short sentence, but I'll short and concise in a concise way. But I'll try. Your question is, what is an aghora, or who is an aghora? Is that what you're asking me?
Yeah, who are the aghoras? What is an aghora? Yeah,
aghoras?
Just in general, really, like pack it up.
Yeah, well, aghora is a traditionally part of what one nowadays called Hinduism, or different traditions from Indic religions, I should say. And aghoras generally are connected to Antinomian practices. Of course, they are traditionally a development, or what remained of an older tradition from a Kapalika tradition. Kapala meaning skull, so Kapalika is a skull bearer, and Kapalika traditions, they've come from a tantric revelation rather than a Puranic revelation. So an aghora really is, in a nutshell, is a tantric practitioner of the Kapalika tradition.
So that's general. So you have,
that's very general. You did ask quite general.
Yeah, exactly. So you dealt with a specific group of aghoras, right? Mm-hmm. that you studied, and they have a connection with the Kamakhya Ambubachi festival specifically. Could you tell us a little bit about how they fit in with the overall kind of aghora culture?
I should have mentioned this also. The aghora is both a dharma and a practice. So there are various kinds of aghoras from different traditions. So take for instance the Nath Sampradayas. They have 12 plants, 12 pantis, 12 paths within them. They also have aghoras within the Nath traditions, and of course these aghoras that I've been working with, they are not from the Nath Sampradaya. They are from an independent community of aghora that has its connection to a Kaula tradition, which comes from the Mantra Marga. So they are from South India, from Tamil Nadu, and they perform the Yoni Puja in Kamakhya in Assam.
So they travel every year up to the Assam.
Well, they travel more than that because they visit Kamakhya, every so often. But in Kamakhya itself, and I should just say this, they don't do that in the temple. They, in the temple, the temple worship is done by the Brahmins, basically. Although it's tantric worship in the temple, but they do outside the temple. They do in an adjacent area within the temple compounds. They do in the cremation grounds. So they are in the temple grounds, more or less in that area, but they're not going to Kamakhya to perform it at the temple.
So what is their relationship with the priests in the temple?
Almost none.
So they perform a completely separate,
entirely separate Yoni Puja. They do visit the temple because that's where the Śakta Pita is, but their ritual is separate from the temple.
Okay, briefly, what is the ritual involved?
The ritual, the ritual is connected to the myth of the falling of the Yoni of the goddess onto earth, and the temple itself represents a Shakti pit, which represents the goddess Yoni, the goddess vulva. And during Ambubachi Mela, the goddess, she menstruates, and the aghoras go there for the performance of the Yoni Puja, their own Yoni Puja, of course, separate from the temple.
Right, and that involves certain sacrifices and
yeah, that involves that. Yes, and involve Antinomian practices that are not quite common in modern, in I would say, mainstream Hinduism or popular Hinduism.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, the sacrifice of animals, or the drinking, taking certain substances, such as normal average practices from the left-hand tantra. Sorry.
Yeah. So here's the question. So you have these aghoras practicing, their left-hand tantra outside the Kamakhya Temple, and it's kind of lesser known. More people know about the Kamakhya Temple itself. So how did you yourself? Getting involved? How did you find out about them? How did you get involved with them?
Wow, I went to Kamakhya and I had some awareness of it, and whilst there, and of course I did not know this particular Aghoris, but I met an individual, quite an interesting one, from Mumbai. His name is Firozi Shakir Mohammed. He claims to be the only Muslim Aghori in the world, and in a sense he is, but at the same time he might not be, because he's many things. He's also a Sufi. He's also a Buddhist, and he's also got initiation from the Dashanami Sampradaya. And I met him there, and then he said, would you like to meet my guru, my Aghori guru? And I said, yeah, of course. And he took me to meet Manikandan, who is the person who is the guru for this particular group that I've been working along with for quite a few years, and that's how I met them. I met the guru first, and then I met his congregation. I met his disciples, and then we established contact from there.
Mm-hmm. So you kind of got involved in a sense in both a studying and a friendship type relationship with them, right?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, one can never really disassociate. If you go to study something somewhere and you're not connected with it, you might be doing something wrong. So we've established a mutual friendship with the Aghoris and I've been involved with their activities. Not in India, of course, but when I'm there, then I'm there with them doing their thing.
So you're studying them, and so what kind of field work were you doing? What are the specific sort of type of the field work you were performing?
I was doing field work in relation to their ritual practices.
Uh-huh.
So in order to do that, perhaps maybe this would be a good point to touch on the topic of ethics. In order to do that, one cannot just simply step in, go and ask a bunch of questions and take a few pictures and never return, or return I don't know when, and have no contact and never see them again. So I established some level of friendship with them. At first, I did not stay with them the first time I went. The second time I went, I stayed with them, and I was looking into their ritual practices, specifically to do with the Yoni Puja. So that was primarily what I was doing.
Mm-hmm. So
and of course, like one goes with a certain plan to look into the specifics of a certain ritual, and then everything changed because you have all of a sudden just faced with different kinds of things that surface on your investigations.
So you touched on ethics, which is interesting. So
Yeah.
I have someone was asking me to ask this of you. There's a long history of visually representing the exotic, one that is heavily critiqued. Like for instance, you have, like in your case, it's very much visually because it's through photography as well. And there's a sense that the exotic is the other type of thing, that when it's presented by a researcher, it's something that's, something to be viewed voyeur-like almost. Mm-hmm. And but at the same time, the persons who are practicing are very much, they're very serious and very, very kind of like committed to this. So there has to be a degree of respect from the researcher towards them as well, towards these practices and everything. So how do you deal with the ethics of visual representation of the Aghoris in light of all these critiques that have been going on for a while?
Well,
that makes sense.
You keep yourself away from National Geographic. No, I first of all, one has established a level of trust before you can go into someone's realm and ask them information about their private practices. So, of course, going to meet an Aghori is not simply a matter of going and meeting someone who's doing or having some Antinomian Practices, taking a bunch of pictures and walk away with it and then showing to the world. How to say this? I established from the very beginning that the fact that I did not want, or I do not want them to tell me anything that they don't want to tell me. And I don't want to represent them in ways in which they don't want to be represented. So I never had that situation where I directed them to pose in a certain way or to do certain thing for me to take a picture. I took a picture because that's what they were doing at the time. And I always had the approval. I think there's a picture one can, I showed it, I sent it to you with the Manikanda Nagori with my book in his hand, and he's, you know, quite happy. By the way, they do, or they did quite often in the past, ask me for pictures so that they could use it, and not just for their social media, which they're very, very aware of social media. They use it. They have Manikanda has a YouTube channel himself, but to promote themselves and you know, make a banner. So the one of them, they made a banner with a picture that I've taken, and one of their complaints, and I think one of the complaints that I got was that it wasn't a color picture, you know, and how do you represent the Aghoras? By the way, I'm not claiming to represent, but in terms of representing as a photograph, as an object, a bunch of people who don't want to be represented in black and white, because just like most of us, they also see the world in color. So, you know, what can one do? You know, maybe I am also at blame when it comes to representing something that's not completely real, but not in an exotic-sized manner by which, you know, such mediums are representing or have representing Aghoris. So I've published black and white pictures with their consent, and I've explained to them, and which they completely understood and agreed with me, that one cannot really capture the color as we see colors with your eyes, you know, by mechanical means. So black and white was the most neutral thing I could produce from that interaction. Does that make sense to you, what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, it makes sense to me. I mean, there's also this idea that, okay, so you say you build a rapport to a degree with them, so that there's a degree of trust between you and them. And does that trust extend to the point where, you know, they're just willing to trust whatever you do? Or is there some kind of, is there always a kind of back and forth constantly going between you, a kind of communication about this, well, even this idea of representation?
Just like with people that you've worked with, or people that you're friends with, you always have a back and forth communication with them, and you might disagree with them with certain things, but you always are respectful to their choices, because it's, you know, you want it to be not a work that they don't have a stake at it. I want it to be beneficial for them as much as it is for me, you know, like, and I'm very grateful to have been welcomed into their world, and to have been sheltered by them in many occasions, and representing them is an honor that should be cherished, not just with a production of like an academic paper, but, you know, putting it out there for general people to look at and to read about them as much as, or in a way that they want to be perceived by people.
So okay, keeping with this idea of this rapport, this kind of like communication, as you're also a researcher, how did you find the balance between being a researcher and, in a sense, also becoming part of the group, becoming part of a group of people who trust each other, in a sense? How did you maintain that balance? Did you maintain that balance? Was there problems with it?
It's an interesting one, isn't it? I think, you know, what researchers often lack is and I'm not saying I'm not like bragging about it, but I think what researchers lack, purely academic researchers, what they lack is experiences with the subject which they are studying or investigating. And of course, I cannot completely disassociate myself from being an academic or a researcher in those environments, but I can also not help myself not to participate in it whilst I'm at it. Insofar, of course, I'm not positionality is you know, it has everything to do with it. I'm not from South Asia. I'm not an Aghori. I am certainly not, you know, anything that could be called an ascetic or have antinomian practices, and yet I am there with them. And I, you know, if someone, you know, if I go to see Manikandan Aghori, I also bow down. I also take the tika, you know, at the end of the puja to put on my forehead. But I'm not anyone's disciple or following a particular Aghoric path. But you cannot, what I'm trying to say is that if you go into a situation where there is a certain element of ritual, and you know some things about, you know, the theological implications and its history and so forth, you cannot help yourself but to be affected by it. And then if you go in with the mentality that you're just there as an observer, then you're doing something wrong, you know. But that's why I suggest that people experiment with different forms of reality and religious experiences rather than just studying them as a mere subject.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, were there issues that come, because there's such an extreme, their practices are so extreme. Did that affect you in any way? The fact that you have to kind
like
of...
You mean like having nightmares at night?
Yeah, all kinds of things like that, yeah.
No. Well, you know, of course it does. But you know, maybe I shouldn't really talk much about that because some of them are private. But yes, it does affect you. Of course, it does affect you. You know, and you know, it's hardship. It's not easy, you know, and it's not an easy path. I mean, how many people do we know that become Aghori? You know, it's a tiny minority in the whole Indic traditions and everything that came out of South Asia. You know, it's not, you know, it's not popular at all. So, you know, precisely because it's a difficult path. It's not kushti. It's not easy.
So this touches on another issue that you're dealing with, in a sense, two different worlds. You have the Aghoris with their own world, and then you have your work, your world, not only as a researcher, but also just as a person who lives in another world, a different situation and everything. So from the point of view of being able to be a little objective from that, what do you consider the Aghoris' place within contemporary society? So the other way around, in other words, do you see the Aghoris as being, you know, in a sense, part of society? Do you see them being completely apart from society? Is there a sense in which there's a mix between the two? What is their place?
That's a very interesting question, because often the assumption is that an Aghori is a completely outsider of society. I think that's one of the exoticism or exotic way that Aghoris have been portrayed. But Aghoris, historically speaking, have much involvement with royal patronages and you know, all kinds of monastic lives, all kinds of institutionalized life. In the modern day, this particular group of Aghori, led by Manikandan Aghori, they do have various, I would say, roles and functions within the society of South Asia, in a minute as it be. They do run a philanthropic charity for the needy, and also something to do with education of children, school materials and clothing for you know, in Kamakhya, for instance, you know, one of the things that they do at the end of the Yoni Puja is to distribute saris for the elderly ladies, and the saris come in a packet with 100 rupees note as a donation to them. So they do have, the Antinomian practices are the practices that they have as their method to achieving X, Y, and Z, you know, be it supernatural powers and so forth, and appeasing the goddess. or the ferocious goddess and so forth. But they do have a place within the society by and large. They are commissioned they're paid to perform public functions such as pujas, exorcism. Manikanda himself is an exorcist, you know. So yeah, it's a career, it's a path. It's not like something that's a gory path. Is not something that's completely on the margins of South Asian society. They're not, certainly not.
What would you think is the reason they do this? Why would an antinomian group who has very strict practices, who seem to be self-sufficient by themselves, why would they, number one, why would they be involved in society to any degree? And number two, you know, why would they, anyway, stick with one first of all, why would they be involved?
Yeah, there's another very good question. There are various levels that one could look at it. One could superficially, one could say, you know, it's charity for hedonistic reasons, or power, or, you know, power in the sense not that it's charity, but the rituals, you know, the status it creates. But then I don't think that ever has been in a time in history where aghoris were completely outside society. I mean, there were, of course, antinomian people who, up to this day, live by the side of the river in the cremation grounds and all that. But historically speaking, the tradition has, say for instance, the king of Nepal back in the days, you know, had his own personal aghori, you know, and aghoris have enjoyed quite a place in society. Be someone fearing them, and or be someone, you know, not wanting to have anything to do with them, so they get away with certain things. Or having them exercising certain powers over certain places. I mean, they're very powerful people, and you can look at it sociologically, you know, which I think it's a valid way, but it might be not a so profound way to look into the situation. But you might look into more mystically and say, well, hold on, what's really going on here, you know, in terms of power? Because it's not just that they claim to have some powers, you know, people do believe that they have powers, and people, you know, bring their sick to be healed by them, or a relative who is suffering with some sort of situation to be exorcised by them. So they do have a role. Yeah. Does that make sense to you? I'm trying to say?
Yeah, absolutely. There's an extended kind of an added part to that question I wanted to ask you, and that is, in a sense, you could say they're performing a role. They're performing roles in society. Yeah. But is there also sorry, do you want to, if you want to say something?
They perform. Some of them, not all, of course. We cannot generalize. Some of them are performing roles in the society. However, they still have antinomian roles that are personal practices that they wouldn't share with anyone.
Right. Interesting.
Yeah, like the pictures that I've taken that I'll never publish, because they just wouldn't want it in a book, you see, and those are things that should be kept away from the public. So
again, I wanted to ask, just to continue on this a little bit. So we're talking about, yeah, sure, there's parts of the practice that are very kind of, like, would say, personal, esoteric, whatever. It's part of their own beingness in a sense, you know. And then there's other practices they do that might be kind of to extend in to a degree, but as a whole, as a very kind of, I would say, even as a deeper understanding of them as people, as a society in a sense, you know, are the aghoris inside or outside of the social order, do you think, despite their activities? And I mean, in a deeper sense, is it possible to kind of like straddle both worlds?
Of course, no, it's not for everyone, but there's a passage from a tantric text from the 12th century, I believe, which as far as I remember, it's a kaula, meaning someone from the Kula tradition, which has, of course, Kapalika elements in them. They can pass as anything in the world, but inside, in private, they are Shaktas, you know. So, you know, those are the qualities. One of aghoris in the qualities in aghoris in the society is that the quality of the aghoris is that an aghori can pass as anything, but or a kapalika can pass as anything, but in private, one might be practicing certain things that's not out there in the open.
Interesting. And so onto that one, I mean, it's difficult to define.
That sentence that I kind of rephrased it, it's in my book.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yeah, it's quoted.
There you go. Yeah. So on that, I mean, I always wondered if there is such a thing as an antinomian practice and what that actually means in a sense, because there's always, even if it's separate from society, there's always certain rules, regulations, certain ways of life that are followed,
Absolutely.
And certain strictures that are followed, which kind of runs against, like the name of your book, against the grain of something that's supposed to be completely against every, norm altogether, So would you say that their practices are antinomian at all? How would you describe their practices? Would you describe them as antinomian for sure? Would you say there's something else going on here?
But it's a very tricky one, because although the practices are antinomian, the people are not necessarily 24/7 antinomians in the world, you see. So if you look historically speaking, if you look at certain texts, you say what antinomian practices are described in the 6th or 10th century. Well, one of them was going up in the public market and howling like dogs. I think that's the intent is that you would get someone's reaction, and you get their good karma, and they would get your bad karma or something like that. But I don't think that practices happen anymore. Orgiastic consecration, that happens, and of course that's a practice. But is that how much antinomian? How other people practicing that antinomian practice? Antinomians because they practice it, or are they practicing antinomian practices whilst not being completely antinomian, renunciant 24/7 for a long period of time in their lives?
So in a sense,
like for instance, just 1 second, like one of the Aghoris, disciples of Manikandan, he's an Aghori, and he also runs a textile company in Mumbai. And Firozi, I told you, Firozi G is a very interesting character. Firozi Shakir Mohammed, and he has got many identities, and he's all of them. But he's also a costume designer for Bollywood movies.
Interesting, huh? So what, he just does his designing, and then on the weekends,
that's his job. He's
on the weekends he just undresses down to a coping and goes.
No, not just on the weekends. Any day of the week, anytime. You see? Yeah.
So interesting. And when he gets home, he becomes an Adora Gory. Is that how it works? Or
well, I'm not sure quite exactly when one becomes something and one does not become something. I think he's always who he claims to be. He is an Aghori. He is a Muslim. He is a Dashanami, whoever. He's all these things at all times, but he might show it to you sometimes because that's what he does, And this is I'm talking about him. It could be any of them, but the guru, the main guru, of course, it's Manikandan, and he's an Aghori 24/7, and he performs various roles. As I said, the Yoni Puja, exorcism, other functions anyway, the philanthropic things and all of that. But his identity is as an Aghori guru. Yes. And he's got disciples all over, not just India, outside of India too. There's, from the UK, from Czech Republic, some of whom I become quite close to.
So when they're from outside of India, how does that mix happen? Someone from are they very accepting of people outside of India?
That is a thing I cannot comment on too much, because although I have been in India in the presence of the Western disciples and the Aghori guru, but I haven't had much observation, and I did not. I was just hanging out with them, be it onto a forest or taking a boat trip, and they all seem fine. But when they're doing their practices, which I've been told, I've been made aware of it, I'm not present in that, so I don't. I don't know.
Okay, fair enough. Just a quick sidebar question, because you were talking about, I forget his name, the Muslim Aghori. Do they mix between each other? Different, you got Hindu Aghoris or Shakta Aghoris, and you've got like, the Muslim Aghoris. Or
Oh,
they're
there's a
just completely
Shakta
separate?
Aghoris. Those are Shakta Aghoris. Those are
So
Aghoris.
there's no mixing going on. They're just separate groups, but they all call themselves basically Aghoris. Is that how it works?
Yeah, no, they do occasionally mix, and of course in Kamakhya, for instance, in the cremation grounds there, where the Aghoris from South India, from Tamil Nadu, the ones I'm talking about, perform the Yoni Puja, is also, the space is also more or less shared with a minority of Aghoris from the not Sampradaya, and that they do mingle and they have their own discussions and so forth. But they come from two different traditions.
Oh, okay. So it
Yeah.
runs like that. Running low on time, but I'll give you one last thing I wanted to ask is the future. So what do you think is the relevance and future of the Aghoris in contemporary Indian society? What do you think is their future? Do you see them continuing? Do you see it being maintained for, infinite number of years, whatever? Do you see it as gradually fading out? Do you see that actually?
I will generalize now, and I'll say not just that's purely speculation, okay? But it's my feeling that not just with the Aghoris, but with all the other sadhus, especially the Ramanandis and the Dashanamis, they've been there for as long as they have been, and they're not going anywhere. The tradition and the community will continue existing, and perhaps even like I think the Ramanandi community now is one of the largest communities of sadhus in India, so it's just growing really, and the more you go back there, the more you see it just getting bigger and bigger. So I don't think they're going to go anywhere. And because they haven't been there, they haven't gone anywhere for hundreds of years, and I don't see why they should, or how it would be possible that they would disappear. But on the other hand, one must say that unfortunately for the past few years, a lot of these sadhu communities, not just specifically the Aghoris, but other sadhus from other orientations, they have been involved with, or say influenced by, I should say, right-wing politics from the BJP. So that is already a shift in itself that has been happening for a few years, and that I think the tendency of that continue to happen is very likely. And I don't know what's likely to I cannot make the prediction of as to what to expect in 10, 20 years time with the sadhu communities in terms of, political alliances, especially with the far right.
Someone's asking, I'm curious about the connection with right-wing politics. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, well, for the past good few years, almost like a decade, or maybe more than a decade, there's a really good book about it, and I forgot the name of the author now, but I can send you can send to the people here today. It's a book called Sadhu Games. It's a very interesting book about the influence or the co-option of the right-wing movements and think tanks in India, inserting themselves in sadhu communities and religious community temples and everywhere. It's pretty much, it's something that it's quite common, unfortunately, these days. They've got people in places of power who are themselves members of religious communities, such as, take for instance the case of the Nath yogis. They got Adinath as a member of their the government, the local government in India, and BJP, and that I think the sad part of it, and I say that someone who is of course not unaffected by it. I am pretty much affected by it, just like everybody else. The sad part of it is that it does change things for the sadhus for the communities and tradition, and of course, but it's inevitable that things will remain the same forever. The things will not remain the same as they have not. They're kings and governors and invaders and who else, British Empire, who came and had an influence on everything that's done on the ground. but I think things have deteriorated quite a lot within the Sadhu communities on account of the far right government of India. That's my opinion.
Okay, so another question here. So actually, the question is interesting because you, at the beginning of the pictures you showed, you at the beginning of the picture, one of the first pictures you showed was of someone who looked like someone who's you know, in a sari and everything, right? And that was a hijra. That was a hijra, right?
No,
so the question,
yeah, okay, a hijra and kinara is a long story.
Kinaras.
But yeah,
Kinara,
that's a kinara, yeah.
So
a transgender, yes.
Right, exactly. So is there, so what is it about, what is it with gender in the actual community? Are women allowed? Is it, what's the thing with the transgender thing? Can you explain a little bit about that?
Well, that's a very complicated business.
Can you, is there any way of simplifying it? I don't know.
Yeah, how long do we have? Because it's very interesting. It's very interesting, but yes and no. You know, things are not necessarily as bad as it might seem at first. You know, like to certain people, but then, yeah. I think the implications of, say, gender issues within a Sadhu community, in particular with the Aghoris, is that, yes, the Aghoris are absolutely fine with women, and they're not like hiding themselves in a cave and not looking or despising women, you know. But on the other hand, there is, of course, gender roles that pervades, you know, the whole South Asian continent, and indeed the whole planet, if you in that sense, in some places, you know, worse than others, and that has an impact on women that is not very positive to some of them, and the whole thing with the Kinara is interesting because biologically born women, they don't partake in the Yoni Puja, although it's a puja to the goddess, to propitiate the goddess. But the transgender women of the Kinara, they do have a participation in the puja. So that raises a lot of questions, which I'm, you know, not ready to attempt to answer right now, because it creates a whole complexity of issues that we simply don't have enough time for it at the moment, but you can think about it.
Okay, I'll leave it at that.
Maybe we should do just one specific conversation just about that in itself.
Yeah,
about
we can do another one.
The issues pertaining to gender in the Agori communities, you know.
And also the idea that the appropriating of the goddess.
Yes, because at the first glance it seems like, oh yeah, worshipping of the goddess, which is nevertheless the worshipping of the goddess. But on the other hand, is men worshipping the goddess in order to get something from the goddess.
There's a whole,
that opens up a whole realm of things that, you know, it's just highly complex and interesting. Sorry, that's already in the poll, so you can go back.
Okay.
Yeah.
So another question here. So what is the relationship with this group of Aghoris you're dealing with, and the law and the media in contemporary society?
So the law and media, is that what you said?
Yeah. So the law as in, you know,
the law.
And media in contemporary society, and there's a kind of subclause that the skull garland is quite confronting.
Yeah, again, it's an interesting one because it's quite confronting. But on the other hand, you know, one should not look at media just in terms of traditional media, you know, the TV channels that we have and all that. I mean, social media is nevertheless a media, and the Aghoris themselves, they have a huge presence in the social media. Manikandan Aghori has a YouTube channel where he daily posts videos of quite well produced of their pujas and activities and the philanthropical activities that they do, and the sacrifices and so forth. You know, so it's an interesting one to look at.
It's quite an interesting like connection between, you know, society and this group, you know, that is going on.
Yeah,
so many ways. Yeah,
and also, you know, he's on TV quite a lot. He gives a lot of TV interviews, you know, because he's the main figure. He's the guy, right? Of course, he should be on TV.
Yeah. And so, how do the others? I mean, you've dealt with not just him, but you've also spoken to many of the other practitioners who are with him when they're performing, especially during the Mela up in Assam. You know, so how are they've taken on a similar kind of role in the sense that they also perform a lot of philanthropic work as well? Do they also get involved
with him? They have a charity trust, but they are, I would say most of them are his disciple. So they work under him as in guru-disciple relationship. So yeah, go on, sorry.
So those, like, for instance, you said there's a couple who have businesses or whatever, so they help financially, that type of thing. Is that how it works? Okay. And okay, so one more question. So is your field work with the Aghoris continuing in the future?
Yes, absolutely.
What do you see yourself doing with them in the future?
Well, initially I wasn't even going to make a book or write a paper. It was a film. I wanted to make a documentary about ritual practices, and I started filming it. And then a pandemic came, and then I couldn't continue filming. But I do have plans to go back and spend time with them, hang out with them, and do some more filming and investigating certain aspects, which I haven't talked about really, about the ritual practices, like the specifics, you know, about ritual theory. So yeah, I will continue, you know, with their blessings, and working with them, hanging out with them, and having a good time with them.
And also trying to be a researcher at the same time.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, you know, we are many things. You know, our identity is not just a social or you know, or gender, or you know, we have, you know, identities that we just cannot divorce from. You know, you can be a researcher and be a really good professional whilst at it. However, you can, you know, you're a human being, and you should get involved, and you should have feelings, and you know, hang out with your friends, be them Aghoris or Jews or whoever.
I mean, did you learn something? I mean, it's interesting, your interactions with them. In many ways, it's a two-way thing. What do you think you learned from them, or what do you think they learned from you?
Oh God, I don't know what they learned from me.
Well, what did you learn from them? I mean, it seems like you're also able to, you know, straddle two different worlds as well, in a sense.
Yeah, what did I learn from them? I learned many good things from them. Well, I tell you very quickly then, that's one of them. He's an Aghori from a different community, a Sampradaya. And I never took a photograph of this Aghori I'm talking about right now. And there is one picture of me and him together in the same picture, which wasn't taken by me. And every time I go and see him, and although he would have no problem me having taking his picture and, you know, and publishing and all that, I know that I'm talking with someone who is very, very serious about his practice, has a deep wealth of knowledge about what he's doing and the tradition and the text and so forth. So every time I go to him, I have hundreds of questions, and he's a never-ending supplier of answers. You know, he's a highly learned individual. And I'm talking about some Aghoris in Nepal. You know, you can go and ask this Aghori anything to do with I don't know, the Netra Tantra or the Brahmayana Tantra, and you know, chakra, any technical stuff he would know. He's a practitioner, and he's also a pandita. He's also a how would you call a pandita? He's also a scholar, you know, in that sense. So yeah, I learn a lot from him. I learn a lot from all the Aghoris, and you know, it's an amazing thing to be blessed with such an opportunity, you know, to not just to hang out, but go and say, well, hold on, I read this somewhere. No, what do you think of this? You know, of course, you might not be discussing scholarly stuff all the time, you know, like Shakta Aghoris, for instance, in Nepal. He's well read, you know, he's very well read. You know, you can talk to him about Noam Chomsky, and you can talk to him about, you know, all kinds of stuff in literature and music and so forth. He's very not just aware, but as an interesting takes on these things.
Polymath or something, right?
Yeah. No.
So here's a question, I guess, is for someone who wants to do research on a group like this. How did your first meeting with Aghori look like? How did you convince them to allow you to observe their life?
God, I told you already that I met Firaz in Mumbai. He's from Mumbai in Assam, and he took me to meet his guru, and then I had no idea who his guru was or what to expect. But when we walked through these little roads in Kamakhya and went to the cremation grounds, and there I meet Manikandan, and the first thing is he says to me is, "Would you like tea, chai?" And of course, I like chai. I love chai. And we just sit there and chat. And I had my brother with me. My brother has no academic background in anything. He's a computer guy, and in fact now a tattoo artist. But and my brother was there with me, and then my brother was freaking out. He was like, "Let's get out of here, get out of here." And Manikandan was just nice, and I told him who I was, what I was up to. There was never like a moment where I had to pretend to be something which I was not. And I told him exactly what I was doing. And then he said, "Oh, would you like to come back at midnight? At midnight, we starting the Yoni Puja. You're welcome to come." And I said, "Yes, of course." So I came back at midnight, and by that time they had brought in the corpse of a lady, an elderly lady. And then we were there drinking tea, and they brought the corpse, and my brother like, "Let's get out of here, let's get out of here." And of course, it was all very humorous and interesting, and people who are genuinely doing their thing, you might, not believe it, you might not share the same practices and opinions and so forth, but it's very interesting individuals doing their own thing.
Just to give everyone an idea quickly, you mentioned corpse. Where did they get the corpse from? Just to give everyone an idea.
I was told that this one was, in particular, was an elderly lady who passed away during the Ambubachi Mela, and it was considered auspicious because she was from that area in Kamakhya, and she passed away during the Ambubachi Mela. It was auspicious to bring her to the cremation grounds, to the Aghoris first. Yeah, but of course, they can get a body anywhere. They can go to the Ganges, and in fact, they do spend quite a lot of time in several months in Varanasi, in Kashi, on the other side of the river, and that's quite easily. Bodies are quite easily available there, and but it's not like as you might think, as in a National Geographic type of thing, that they get the body and they eat the body, and it's the body is required for a specific type of sadhana. And if you're not doing that sadhana, then therefore you do not require to find a body and do X, Y, and Z with it. So it's not something that happens every day. It's not what they do.
Mm-hmm. One last thing, because we've run out of time, but someone wants to say thank you, and I have a question about the YouTube channel that was the Manju Khanda YouTube channel.
Yeah.
Person tried to find it. Do you have, but couldn't find it? Do you have?
I can. Shall I go send a link right now to?
Just send it to the chat, I guess, when you get a chance. While you're doing that, we've come to the end of to our time up for now. Wanted to thank Prema for the time he took to explain this to us and give us a little bit of insight into his research into the Aghoris. Okay, do you want to put it into
I'll put into the chat, and you can check him out. And
this is the YouTube channel for the main Aghori, the one you've seen all the pictures of recently. We have anyway, you can see the picture if you go to the OCHS website and you go to our research project and you go to this actual lecture, this guest lecture, and you'll see the page for that, and I can link that. Actually, I can give you that link right now, and then you can see a picture of him on that at the bottom. If you scroll down, you'll see him. There it is. I'll just paste it into the link, and you've got that's it. And if you scroll down a little bit on that, you'll see him holding up Prema's book. Okay. So I think we'll leave it for now. Again, thank you, Prema, for your time and your energy and for your knowledge.
I hope I have managed to be useful somehow to you.
No, it's been very interesting. Thank you. And we will be in touch with everyone about the next lecture, which will be, I think, happening in, if I remember rightly, in May. So, okay, until then, take care, everyone. And
thank you.
We look forward to seeing you again.